Good evening. I'm Rosemary Mackey, and I'm the program chair for the League of Women Voters of Coastal Georgia. And I'm here tonight representing Nina Altschuler, who's away, and we had hoped that she would be able to be here with us via computer, but her networks were so bad that she asked me if I would sit in for her. So I will do my best. We are awfully glad that you are joining us today for one of our monthly meetings. This one devoted to voting rights challenges that we're seeing today and the lessons that we can learn from what happened during the civil rights movement and since then. We're going to have a number of speakers, but I'm going to introduce our moderator, who will actually do the introduction of the speakers. Shirley James is probably known to a great many of you already. She is the publisher of the Savannah Tribune. She attended Spelman College. She then went on to Harvard, where she got a degree. She met her wonderful husband there, and he persuaded her to move back to Savannah. She was from South Carolina, and she has done some remarkable things here in Savannah. Many, too many to go over. And so I'm just going to turn it over to Shirley and say thank you once again, Shirley, for helping us with this incredibly important topic.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. In a very previous time with Rosemary last week, I always say it's very difficult to tell her no. But anyway, I have one correction to make. My husband and I met in college, not in graduate school in Atlanta. So if he hears that, I want him to know that I made that correction. Okay, thank you. But I do thank you, all of you who are members of the League of Women Voters of Coastal Georgia, for inviting me to moderate this evening on this very important topic. And you're going to hear from former mayors Otis Johnson and hopefully Edna Jackson. She's actually on the road from Atlanta. She was in session today, so hopefully she'll join us later. But you're going to hear from them about growing up during the tumultuous earlier struggles for achieving the right to vote right here in Chatham County and elsewhere. And then Attorney Chadrick Mance, who's the current president of the local branch of the NAACP, and he will talk about the challenges that we're currently facing in getting Savannahans and persons in Chatham County out to vote at a time such as this, when voter suppression is so rampant. John Lewis, as you know, served in Congress for 33 years and fought for voting rights. And he was one of the original freedom riders who helped to end racial segregation in the US, and then led that first of 3 Selma to Montgomery marches across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. He fought to repair the rolled back voter protection of the Voting Rights Acts of 1965. And he called on Congress before all during his term there and definitely before his untimely death to pass a permanent national act to guarantee voting rights for Black and Brown Americans across this nation, and actually for everyone across this nation, a battle that we are still fighting today. So our aim tonight is to learn from history and to find ways that we can emulate these bold predecessors and make sure that every citizen who has the right to vote may do so. I'd like to just very briefly tell you a little bit about the father of Savannah's modern civil rights movement, the Reverend Dr. Ralph Mark Gilbert. And you've heard of the Ralph Mark Gilbert Civil Rights Museum, who was named for him. The Reverend Ralph Mark Gilbert was one of the most visible Black activists in Savannah. In 1942, he reorganized the Savannah Branch of the NAACP and served as its president until 1950. Gilbert then organized the largest NAACP youth council in the country during his presidency and served as president of the Georgia State Conference of the NAACP from 1942 until 1948. He traveled throughout the state to organize other branches in local Black churches. Reverend Gilbert was a major leader in the political life of Blacks in Georgia. It was his support of the Primus King case in Columbus, Georgia, that Blacks were allowed to finally vote in a Democratic primary in 1946. King, who was a Black Baptist and a barber in Columbus, sued the Muscogee County Registrar for denying him the right to vote in the Democratic primary election of 1944. Gilbert provided the moral and financial support for the lawsuit, which King won in 1946, 2 years later, on an appeal in a federal court, which forced Georgia to end the white primary in 1946. Now, as a result of that particular suit, where Georgia's white primary basically had been used as a form of white supremacy, which said that whoever won the primary would ultimately win the election, and that denied Blacks a voice in the process. So this was the case when Eugene Talmadge, who was a avowed racist, was elected Georgia 2 different times as governor. First in 1930, from 1933 to 1937, and again in 1941 to 1943. He was elected through the white primary. So as a result of the case being won by Primus King in 1946, there was a mass exodus of white Southerners from the Democratic Party, and they formed what they called a new Dixiecrat Party. But after that party failed, that is when many of the whites in the state of Georgia moved to the Republican Party. So we pay homage to the Reverend Dr. Ralph Mark Gilbert as one of Savannah's, maybe as the Savannah's father of the modern civil rights movement. Tonight, you're going to hear from 3 dynamic persons. And the first will be our honorable former mayor, Dr. Otis Johnson. He served 2 terms as mayor from 2004 until 2012. He is a Savannah native, graduated from A.E. Beach High School, Armstrong Junior College, and he was as the first African-American graduate from that school, and also from the University of Georgia. He served from 1959 to 1965 in the U.S. Naval Reserve. In 1969, he earned his master's degree in social work from the Clark Atlanta University, and in 1980, he received a PhD from the Heller School of Social Policy and Management at Brandeis University. Now, before becoming mayor, he had a very active political role that he played here in the city of Savannah. He was a city councilman representing the 2nd District of Savannah, and he also served on the Savannah-Chatham County Public School Board. Then he assumed the leadership of the Economic Opportunity Authority model and the Model Cities program, and had various roles at Savannah State University, from being a person on the faculty as well as in leadership with department head, and then dean of the School of Social Work there. He grew up in a segregated Savannah, and he is the one that will be quick to point out how Savannah was probably more progressive than any other Southern states, but we still had our challenges then, and we still have them now. So Dr. Johnson, I will yield to you, and then I will introduce our other speakers for the evening. So unmute yourself, Dr. Johnson.
And if you have any questions, would you put them in the chat room? If questions come to mind, put them in the chat room, and we will get to them at the end of the discussions.
Thank you, Mrs. James, for that introduction. Just a couple of notes so that I know that there are people who will wonder. I was the first African-American from Savannah to graduate from the University of Georgia. I was preceded by Charlene Hunter, now Charlene Hunter Galt, and Hamilton Holmes. But anyway, that's just a minor thing but because I know how picky some people are, I want to get that corrected for the record. I want to step back. Mrs. James has given us a great introduction to what we are talking about today, but I want to go back even further than the great Reverend Dr. Ralph Mark Gilbert. After the 15th Amendment was passed and Reconstruction was underway, Black Savannahans took full advantage of the right of Black males to vote, and they elected representatives to the House at the State House, and also senators from Georgia. So we have a long history of exercising our legal rights and then having the state take away those rights. Shortly after the 1970-71 period came in, they began to pass all kinds of laws stripping Black men of the right to vote. I want to also note that I'm saying Black men because white women couldn't vote along with Black women, because women couldn't vote during this period. So now let me fast forward because this is a longitudinal thing. It is, and we're in the next phase of something that started during Reconstruction, and that is our enthusiasm for being a part of the political process, because we understood the significance of being involved in that process. I was born in 1942 in the midst of the Jim Crow era. And as already been mentioned, there were court cases testing the white primary, because as Mrs. James said, being a winner of the white Democratic primary was tantamount to being elected to the office. And so we had the Sweat versus Painter case in Texas, and then we had the Primus case here in Georgia that challenged the white primary and eventually overturned it. So I was born in the middle of all of that struggle. And when Dr. Gilbert was reviving the NAACP, the NAACP in Savannah has the proud history of connecting the necessity of having voter rights with the other issues around civil rights. You can't really exercise your civil rights until you get voting rights to make sure that your civil rights are protected. And so as I grew up in Savannah in the public school system, we had a habit here. I guess it was a habit. I'll say it was a custom. When students at the two Black high schools, and we only had two Black high schools to serve our population during that time, the Alfred E. Beach High School and the Tompkins, or what was then Woodville High School, and later became Tompkins Woodville, Tompkins Woodville. Anyway, we had a habit of registering seniors when we would turn 17 and a half. Our teachers would round us up and educate us on how the system worked. And we had a literacy test system after the primary was outlawed. They instituted the literacy test. And so we had any voter, any potential voter, had to read a section of the Constitution and interpret it. Now, that was an interesting process because it would have been easy for the registrar to just say that we hadn't interpreted it correctly. But through the years, the Black community had built up such political power through its block voting in the 40s and in the 50s that we had a climate in Savannah that wasn't as hostile toward Blacks registering to vote as in other counties in the state of Georgia and across the South. So we would go to the county courthouse, which was located downtown in what we now call the old courthouse. And we would get in line and we would come up to the window and announce our intention to register to vote. And then they would open up this page in the legal book, and we would read the outlined passage, and then the trick was to interpret it to the liking of the registrar. And so for most of the time, we didn't have any trouble with that because we had already set up into motion the block voting system, the Black block voting system that could not elect outright officers, political officers, but we could influence who was elected. And because of that Black power, we were able to have a system in Chatham County that was not hostile, as I said before, to registering to vote. Fast forward to 1960s in 62, 63, where in 1960, the Crusade for Voters was created as an arm of the local branch of the NAACP. Jose Williams was assigned to head up the voter registration drive, and thousands of voters began to register again after they had a purge. It's very interesting that when we get a significant number of voters, we always get a purge. In the last gubernatorial election, we had a purge that knocked off tens of thousands of Black voters. So in the 50s, we had another purge. And so we had to go through the registration process all over again. And because of the legacy, it wasn't that difficult to get a significant number of Blacks on the roll again. And so in 63, the Crusade for Voters peeled off from the NAACP and affiliated with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference under the leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King. And so Jose Williams became the leader of the Crusade for Voters, and then later joined the staff of the SCLC. I know my time is limited and the story is great, so I'll just try to sum it up. Savannah has been an anomaly in terms of the kind of voter participation, Black voter participation that we have historically had, starting with Reconstruction right up to today, when Chatham County is one of 2 or 3, maybe 4 counties that vote almost always for a Democrat majority. And that is how we have been able to do what we have been able to do, because we've taken voter registration and voter participation very seriously, and we continue to do that to this day. And I hope that we'll have some time for questions and answers, but that's the Reader's Digest Journal of the history of Black voting from Reconstruction to the present time.
So I just talked to Edna and she's just about to get on, so which is wonderful. Apparently the session went longer than she thought that it would. So I just sent her the link, so she should be getting on.
Okay. Well,
maybe Chad, you want to introduce Chad, and then we can go backwards a little bit.
That'll be fine. So I was going to thank Dr. Johnson, thank Otis for giving us that background. And it does give us a segue right into what we're currently facing. So the person who's going to give us some inspiration, let's say, some motivation for us to make sure that we stay on task with getting persons out to vote and educating them about the importance of voting is Attorney Chad Mance, who is the current president of the Savannah Branch of the NAACP. Attorney Mance is a graduate of Morehouse College, my brother college, rather, and the University of Georgia Law School. He's also the founder and owner of the Mance Law Firm, a personal injury firm here in Savannah. In January of 2020, he was sworn as the president of the Savannah branch of the NAACP, whose mission, among other things, is to remove all barriers of racial discrimination from the democratic process, to seek to enact and enforce federal, state, and local laws concerning and that secure our civil rights, to inform the public of the adverse effects of racial discrimination and seek its elimination, and of course, to educate persons as to their constitutional rights, and to take all lawful action in furtherance of these principles. Mr. Mance will be the person who will take the history, the very important history of the NAACP here in Savannah and its history throughout the state of Georgia in reference to voting rights, and just discuss our current situation and what we can do and what we hope to do and how we can collaboratively work together to incentivize and make sure that we not only keep the legacy of the vote here in Chatham County, but let us enhance and increase. So Attorney Mance, can you move forward, please? And then we will come back and with our representative and former Mayor Edna Jackson, and then we'll probably have some time to kind of tie it up with all three of you. But I do want to reiterate what Rosemary has said. For those of you who have questions as presentations are being made, please put them in the chat for us. Thank you.
First, thank you, Ms. Jackson, Ms. James, excuse me. You are the dean of so many things in this community, whether it's entrepreneurship or it's voter participation. Thank you for all that you do. And to the League of Women Voters, thank you for including the NAACP. And of course, to Mayor Johnson, who's the dean, my dean, and personal example to me in so many ways. Thank you for all the rich history that you have shared. I strive to be both relevant and brief. I've been asked to talk to you all about the history of the NAACP and how it has impacted voting rights here in Savannah, Georgia. To begin, we start with the founding of the NAACP in 1908. In 1908, the NAACP was founded namely as an interracial cooperative across socioeconomic lines, composed both of Black and white, Jew and Gentile, men and women, in order to combat systemic issues with marginalized groups. And it is from this offspring that we get to where we are today. Although our focus is primarily on the Savannah NAACP chapter, we can't understand Savannah's chapter without first understanding its genesis. Now, the NAACP in 1908 initially believed that the path to equity began through the legal process. That's a very important distinction because it distinguished it as a group from other groups. Later on, the NAACP would evolve to incorporate more of a voter empowerment scheme to its approach to the securing of civil rights. But importantly, at least at the beginning, certainly in the middle of the fight, and arguably today, the path to progress was afforded in the NAACP primarily through legal challenges. And so the NAACP believed that the court systems, for example, the legal process itself was the means to the just end of equality for all people, although the NAACP was founded principally to address issues with people of color. So in 1908, the NAACP is founded as an interracial sort of cooperative across different groups. In 1917, a man named James Weldon Johnson, who is a lawyer, who is an artist, so many different things, and who also played a vital role in the national movement for civil rights, comes here to Savannah, Georgia, and begins the initiation of the Savannah NAACP. At that time, we'll say that's the genesis of the Savannah NAACP, and we are one of the first and one of the most historic NAACPs in the nation. That's not a distinction to be forgotten. So once he comes here and he starts the NAACP, or at least initiates its beginning, magical things start to happen. From this organization, we have a direct influence on national affairs, okay? What do we mean by that? First, both in a conservative light and in a liberal democratic light, arguably the NAACP has directly influenced political participation. Consider this example. The first African-American Superior Court judge, Gene Gaston, was a member of the Savannah NAACP. He was actively involved in its legal affairs, and Judge Gene Gaston was a shrewd, sort of visionary kind of guy. He remembered a young student who was at Savannah State and who was sort of rallying up the students at that time. At that time, he was student body president, and he had sort of a flashy, outlandish, but very, very, very sharp personality. That man was Bobby Lee Hill. Bobby Lee Hill, if you don't know him, was described as sort of a scarecrow in Neiman's Marcus attire. He was sharp as a tack, as some folks describe him in the African-American community, but that sharpness was not merely confined to his physical appearance. He was an intellectual and a legal genius. Now, from Mr. Hill comes the first integrated law firm here in Savannah, Georgia, and comes an interesting dynamic. Our now Supreme Court Justice from Savannah, Georgia, Clarence Thomas, worked for Bobby Hill. And by his own admission, he says that his dream was to work in this law firm. And so from his internship at Bobby Hill's law firm, he gains an appreciation for the depth and the breadth of the law and goes on to ascend, regardless of his philosophical approach, of course, to the law, to the Supreme Court of the United States. So both in liberal affairs and in conservative affairs, the NAACP has influenced the political process. So Bobby Hill is not without significance. He becomes the first elected official since Reconstruction in this part of the state. He goes on and he runs for lieutenant governor. Although he riles up the crowd a bit, he doesn't quite succeed, but his name is certainly the name of a trailblazer in Georgia politics for a variety of reasons that we can't quite get into. So without getting into all of the political machinations of the NAACP has played a role across the board in influencing politics. I have not been asked to talk to you about that role. I have been asked to talk to you about how we have influenced voter participation, and also, more importantly, how the current challenges to voter participation continue to pose unique obstacles to us. And so that's what I'll get to. Mayor Johnson shrewdly mentioned something that is important, that there's a pendulum to our rights. They sort of swing one way and they swing another. And The Reconstruction era really gives us a good example of that. In 1871, there was a law criminalizing repression of Black folks after Reconstruction, and that's the Civil Rights Act of 1871. That was passed predominantly in response to the rise of hate groups, like there is a rise of hate groups today, like the White Citizens Council and so forth. And what we find is every time, particularly people of color, attempt to exercise their rights in a democratic process, there is a commensurate, if not greater response with respect to repressive efforts. And that often happens on a populist level. It happens in the formation of hate groups, for example. And then it is also concomitantly reflected in the systemic barriers that are legislatively enforced. So we have a cycle. At the bottom of the chain, we have the grassroots populist movement of hate. At the top of the chain, we have a systemic movement enforcing it. And then we sort of have a wheel of repression that repeats itself, a cycle that moves on until it is drastically interrupted. And what the NAACP has done is managed to find a way to interrupt that cycle of repression. How have we done that? Principally through our voting empowerment movement, we've done that. So the NAACP has worked with groups like the League of Women Voters, for example, like our fraternities and sororities, particularly in the Black community, like our pastors, and we have formed a massive voter empowerment initiative that, for lack of a better term, is consolidated across interest groups. All of our organization efforts have been concentrated to the idea that not one civil rights group has the money or the power or the resources to take on this gargantuan task of repression by itself. Instead, the civil rights groups, through cooperative, coordinated efforts, through what we'll call cooperative economics and cooperative organization, can in fact rile the crowd up, introduce issues, and register people to vote, and also see that exercise through to the polls. So you might hear of an effort called Souls to the Polls. Well, we've been actively engaged with that before it became a popular term nationwide. You might hear of a term, for example, called Voter Empowerment Initiative. The NAACP has been doing that for a very, very, very long time. In fact, our voter empowerment initiatives continue throughout the year. They don't just end, they're not a seasonal effort. So the NAACP has taken the initiative to really continue to move voter empowerment forward. Now, what are our challenges here today? Our principal challenges are really much of the same challenges that Mayor Johnson faced. We have retrogressed in many ways with respect to this pendulum of change. We certainly have swung one way with the election of Barack Obama, for example, and the near election of Stacey Abrams. Hopefully we'll see, some progress in that way. We've also swung this way in a positive direction with respect to our newly elected senators. And what we see is direct backlash. So we're swinging, there's an attempt to swing it, the pendulum back this way. And that has come principally through this new voter repression law, we'll call it, that has come through Georgia's legislature. And the way that this thing works, this pendulum to push us back works, is that it is not a complete stall or a complete elimination of our right to vote. Instead, it is death by 1,000 cuts. It is repression by 1,000 obstacles. The idea is that if the voter repressor, we'll call it, can introduce enough hurdles to us that would deter enough people to offset the progress that would come from an election, then what we have is we have a referendum to the past. Because enough people don't go vote, we can eliminate the progress that has come through our political system. And that's what it's all about, the disincentivization of voting. And so that's what we're really fighting. We are fighting, and I've heard our leaders talk about this, and I firmly believe this, voter apathy. We are also fighting a sense of anger on a populist level the idea that why do we have this progress here in this state at this time, which is sort of a retributive response to the liberal impulse that has come through Georgia. And we're fighting what I'm just going to tell you, it's downright prejudice is what it is. It used to be Jim Crow. Now it's Jimmy Lee Crow Esquire we're fighting. He might have on an Armani suit, like some of the folks that came down when we tried to vote last time in our presidential election to try to repress us. But nevertheless, Jimmy Lee Crow is still Jim Crow and arguably more sophisticated. And so what we've got to do is we've got to continue to coordinate these efforts across the board. And that's what the NAACP has really been doing through its voter empowerment initiative. I've probably run out of time here talking, but I hope I've answered all questions.
Thank you very much, Attorney Mance. And you've given our listening audience a lot to think about. And definitely, I think you've tied the past with the present. And we are going to now, since she's joined us, our representative, Edna Jackson, and former mayor, let me do a brief introduction of her, and then we will get some comments from her today, especially in reference to some of the things that are currently happening in the state legislature in reference to the, how the Senate Bill 202 and some other bills that we see are, redistricting, reapportionment, I call it censoring in reference to what can be taught in schools, et cetera. But tonight we're basically talking about voting rights and challenges. But if our persons in our voting audience do not understand the challenges that are before us and the issues that are there and how they personally impact them, then that's another, another form of challenge that we have. But very briefly, our representative from the 165th House District to the Georgia Legislature and former Mayor Edna Jackson is a graduate of AE Beach High School. And I think two of my panelists tonight are graduates of AE Beach. So what does that say about AE Beach? It says something positive. She earned the bachelor's and master's degree from Savannah State College in cooperation with a program with Armstrong State College at the time. And at a very early age is when she met Wesley W. Law. And I think he had so much influence on her from the age of 9, really from the age of 9, that she was a part of that youth organization that the Reverend Ralph Mark Gilbert formed. It was one of the largest really in the country. And she became very, very active with that youth group with the NAACP. And during her college years, she actually took time off from college to travel throughout the South and register persons to vote and just lead voter registration drives in Alabama, throughout Georgia, down in Florida. And she was so committed that even at a young age still, she led a group of young people from Florida and took them to the March in Washington in 1963. So the civil rights movement was just a part of her blood. And so all of that led to the kind of community service that she's given to us in Savannah, at Savannah State University when she was employed there. And we worked together for over 30 years there and still work together, even though we retired from that university. But all of those things, I believe, were what just built the foundation for her to be a public servant. And she still is a public servant, and we appreciate her for that. So to my friend, and she was one of the first persons we met when we came to Savannah in 1971. And I'd like to ask the Honorable Edna Jackson if she would at this time share some thoughts with us. And yes, we are running out of time because we do want an opportunity to get some questions from our listening audience. But would you please move ahead, and thank you very much for joining us, even though you were on the floor today in Atlanta. So Edna, it's up to you. So unmute yourself.
We are not sure that Edna is hearing this. Seth has been emailing her. It says she's here. I heard her.
I'm here.
Are you-
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, but we can't
All
see
right.
you. Are you hiding?
know, I don't know how to do it. And probably it's the best you can. You can't see me. I've been on the road since we left Atlanta today, and I'm still on the road trying to get home. But it's my honor and pleasure just to be able to share some of the information. And Shirley, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I guess I need to pay you for that one. But you know, as I listen to the history of Bobby Hill and NAACP has been so dear to me. I would not be where I am today had it not been for NAACP and others in the community. And there's a lady that is sitting right next to me as I'm driving. Her name is Mercedes Wright Arnold, who led the economic boycott on Broughton Street. She's my riding partner back and forth to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. But let me tell you about voter registration, voter education, and what is going on under the dorm. As you have heard, excuse me, as you may have heard and the media has reported, our maps have not been approved. We have 3 maps now. We thought under the leadership of the of our chairman and school board, both of them agreed to a map that we were, ready to approve. However, some of the members of the county commission raised some questions to one of our members of our delegation, and that's Representative Petrie, and he has drawn another map. Excuse me. Since that time, we have begun to meet on the maps. Representative Ron Stevens talked with the chairman, and now we have another map. And one of the things that they were saying we had too many of was mixed boxes, or the lines are drawn, and we've always had that, but it seems to disturb people. So what we have decided to do, because the one thing that we don't want to happen, and I have sat in on some of the reapportionment sessions where they are allowing it, the recommendations to go to a committee that is not made up of people from our community or from any community to make a decision on the final map. So we have gotten together, we've talked about it, we let our thoughts be heard. So what we're planning to do is to look at it together. It's to look at it together and to see what can be done. We requested today our other chair, Edna Jackson. He's a senior member of the Democratic delegation. He suggested that maybe we get representatives from the Chatham County Commission, the chairman, what have you, the leader of the school system, what's his name? And y'all have to forgive me because it's kind of tired, to come together for all of us to sit around and see what we can do. So that's where we are. We were pleased with the first map that had been drawn, but they were looking at numbers. Not only that, there is, excuse me, as you know, I'm driving and talking. The other thing that we have to do is to try and agree. There are 4 votes that are needed, and we thought we had it. So let me take questions so that I can help answer whatever you might have. But we are not giving up on trying to have a map that will be approved by the local delegation, we don't need interference from any outside person, from DeKalb County, Gwinnett County, or any others. This is our map, this is our community. And we feel that we still have time to get that final map drawn so that we can have a good map. Now, that is what is happening under the dome. As you know, Augusta's map has been drawn by a group of people, the special committee that they have. It is a lot of let me see, what I don't know, I don't want to use the word that I really want to use. It is unfortunate that we don't have confidence in each other, not Savannah, but well, in Savannah too, but across the state, that we can draw our maps together as we have done in the past. From what I understand, this is the first time in the history of reapportionment that this has been done. And as you know, and Mayor Johnson and all of you know, we used to sit down with our representatives and look over the maps and make sure that they were equal and that we had representation. This is what we are trying to protect at this time. We have until crossover time, and I can't remember the exact date. I do have it written down, but we also need input and letters from people to let them know that you do not want someone else outside of Chatham County dealing with our maps. We have good minds, we have people that have done it in the past, but that's what is happening. And I can tell you, be honest with you, they don't know whether or not they are going to lose, if they're going to lose position. But it seems like we don't know. But anyway, can you still hear me? Hello?
Yes. Yes, can you hear
Okay,
us?
I didn't know whether you can hear me.
We can hear you,
Yes, I
Edna.
can. So that's
Yep.
where we are. Okay, that is where we are right now. As far as reapportionment is concerned, there are several bills that are on the floor and coming to the floor now on charter schools, and we have to be careful. There are, so I sit on higher education. Our committee met on yesterday, and people, charter schools have asked for the public money that they.
Oh, we lost Edna.
Okay, we lost her again. Edna, I think I'm going to go ahead, and there were a couple of questions in the chat for you, and hopefully you can hear me, and then I'll go back to the other questions since you're on the road and let you answer them. I think
Okay.
you alluded to one of the questions that we had when Jennifer asked when was the deadline, I guess, for the final map to be considered, and you mentioned the crossover date. So usually,
Can you hear me now?
yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so
You're
the question,
absolute. Yeah, I heard the
question was,
crossover
when is
date.
the deadline for you mentioned that the deadline for the final map would probably be during the
2 weeks.
crossover period.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
Oh,
The
2 weeks.
problem is, as you know, all of this affects your midterm elections,
Right.
your primaries. So hopefully we are able to get people up there by Monday. He suggested that we get representatives by Monday, as well as representatives from MPC to come too. And let's sit down and let's look at it together. And then maybe we can come to a consensus. But the two people who raised the issues, as I said, was Pat Farrell and what's her name? Oh God, I'm having one of those moments.
Okay.
Helen Stone.
Okay.
Because their numbers, I don't want to go into the numbers, but their numbers were almost equal, Democrats and Republicans.
Now, the other question related to what you said in reference to what's about to happen as well in reference to the maps is you suggested letters be written. And the question was, should the letters go to individual representatives or should the letters go to committees? Because it sounds like there's a 2-week turnaround time, and that's not much time to act.
Okay, what I would suggest is that they send them, you know, you can do one letter, but send them to all of the representatives, the chairman of the board and the chairman of the school board. I think that will be good if you can do that, and it will let people know that you are hearing about what is going on. I suggest that you let them know that you do not want our maps to be decided by anyone else other than the delegation. Because what has happened when I went to the meeting to see what was happening in Augusta, I watched how the votes were taken. The committee is made up primarily of people that want to change other cities' maps. And I suggest that what you do, you let them know that in the past, that all during reapportionment time, that the maps were handled locally by the delegations. I think that is very important.
Okay, so then are you saying that letters should go to our local leadership in addition to our legislative delegation from Chatham County?
I think it should be both, but
Okay.
I think the letter should be addressed to both equally.
Okay. All right.
Because we need to know that we have the support of what we are doing up there.
Okay, all right, okay. So I'm not sure that there's any other question relative to that, but I hope that those who are in the listening audience realize too, if you said crossover, maybe within the next 2 weeks.
I think I can have, you know, if I were not on the highway, I could give you the exact dates. If there are other members of the delegation on the line, they may have that information, but we need to get it in before crossover. Now, I was concerned, my concern when I first got there, I did raise the issue of why our maps have not been presented. Why? And when it came to one of the dates, and I can't remember what it's called, but our maps were not there. And that is when the new maps were dropped. That's when the new maps were dropped because they didn't think that they were balanced or there were too many split districts. That was the word that I was listening to. But split districts, from what I can understand, could have been worked out through the election board. So we have also extended the information to MPC, and I'm hoping that they will attend on Monday, because we need to go on, that we can't wait another 2 weeks, you know, because then it will get thrown into the legislative committee, and they will have what they call where people come in and testify and what have you. But as I said in the meeting yesterday, most of the time that's to no avail. They will still vote on our map, and we do not. Now, there are members of the delegation, the majority members of the delegation has already said that they don't want that to happen also.
Okay. So what I'm going to summarize from what you're saying is that letters need to be sent both to our local leadership from school board, MPC, Chatham County Commission, even probably the city, etc. We need to also send letters to our Chatham County delegation. I would say, I'm not sure, that maybe they be addressed to the committees who are also considering the maps. And
well, they have not gotten to that point.
Okay,
see, that may be another letter. If we can keep it among ourselves, that will be another letter if we do not get it through. Now, Shirley, what I would do, I would start out addressing the members of the delegation first and sending the copies by listing school board, Chatham County, and whatever else you want, you know.
All right. So I hope that
we can talk about that.
Okay.
You know, but I really think that that is something that needs to be done, because I sat in on one of the cities up in North Georgia, and of course to
they didn't get what they wanted to no avail. The committee voted on it. And you have to look at the leadership of the committee that they have. And people came up to testify as well as Augusta. But it seems like it got into, when it gets into that committee, it comes to the bodies, and then the bodies vote. Well, I'm not trying to do partisan politics, because the lines were drawn originally by MPC, which I thought was good, but and it wasn't partisan.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, drawn.
Okay.
So that's
So
what
I'm
I
gonna-
wanted to say.
Okay, so I think that we have clarity on what you're asking, because our
Okay.
time is moving along.
Yes.
And, yeah, so the other question was, and I think that we can come to that conclusion before we finish for the evening, is should letters also be sent to our local newspapers?
Yeah, that is something that I cannot answer. I think that is something that you will have to make a decision on.
Okay.
We were hoping that we could have settled this without, but the first thing was that we didn't have the maps. The
Okay.
members of the Democratic Party did not have the maps until we heard someone called us. We heard about that second map in the newspaper.
Okay.
We could not, because the rules say that, and I did, I went to get the map from the redistricting office, and I could only get the original map and not the old map. And I don't think that as an elected official, I should have to ask another representative to please let me have a map. And you're talking about our city and our county. So we talked about that. And well, okay, that's it.
Okay. Okay, well, right now, what's
Don't let
important,
me get in this.
I know, because I know you're very passionate about it. So Rosemary, help me now, but I think that what we will glean from her conversation is that we definitely need to get these letters to our local delegation and to copy our local persons who are in charge, like at county, school board, and
Right.
those persons who make decisions. Okay, so that's
Yeah.
that just means that we have to work quickly, because crossover is coming up in about 2 weeks.
I believe
Right, I
it's
think
2
that
weeks.
Seth and
Okay.
I will work together to put together just a briefing on this that we will send to all of our members
Okay,
to ask them to do this. And, I don't know whether Chadrick also may have a role in it with his membership, but I think I'm a great believer that the more people here who hear the same message, and it's important that we have the same message and we all agree on it, that's what we need to do.
okay. Now that will take care of that, but another question that came up, and this goes back to you, Attorney Chad, I'm going to call you affectionately. The question came from Rosemary in reference to what can the League of Women Voters do to join collaboratively, to join efforts with the empowerment and the engagement of voter registration, voter education, as we prepare for the 2022 election cycle, which is happening very soon.
Really, the sky's the limit. The sky's the limit. We will meet you where you are, but things like these are great. Also, assisting in our voter registration efforts is really important, but there is no limitation to what the League of Women Voters can do.
I agree. I don't think there are any limitation because you're a nonpartisan. All you, that's y'all. Please excuse that thing telling me to take my medicine, but
Okay.
that's dumb. Oh, it comes on the most inopportune time. But
Okay.
I think, but we have got to galvanize people. We've got to do reaching out to the church, and it would be good if NAACP, League of Women Voters, Fair Fight, everybody can come up and pull together a plan. The leadership of every organization, a smaller group, not everybody that's speaking. Shirley, your group and the league and everybody has been doing a tremendous job. But sometimes we have to widen that area to get some other people that are involved, and particularly people to talk about, I don't want young people, but I think young people are the movers and the shakers. And I do think that we have to reach out, and no better way to do it is if we could get in some of these classes and talk to kids about the importance of becoming registered voters and what happened in our lives. You know, how we do that, I don't know. And I don't have all the answers, but I think that we can continue this conversation to talk about it, because I noticed that in Atlanta, excuse me, in Atlanta, they are meeting regularly. All organizations. It's almost like it's an arm. You know, Shirley, you've involved the ministers and all of that. And I think that is excellent. But some kind of way, if you look at people that voted, even in my election, the majority of the people were older people, but young people are registered. So how do we capture that? We may have to do a mailing and said, you are now that registered voter. Now we need you to vote. And that's just a suggestion out of my tired body right now.
Okay.
So I hope that I helping. Do you have any more questions for me?
No, I was going to, I think we heard your summary. And as we close out, I was going to ask Otis as well as Attorney Nance to just make some closing kinds of remarks, but closing remarks that are challenging and that look forward to, and you as well, Rosemary, representing the League of Women Voters, in reference to how we can bring this collaboration of the organizations who are present here together, but then those of us who also know and are members of or have affiliations with other organizations that can come into the fold so that we can really get a plan together and move quickly to do what we need to do collaboratively so that we can be ready, you know, for what's coming up.
You got your back.
So I'll start with you, Dr. Johnson.
Yeah,
I agree. I think the coalition between the NAACP, the groups that James represents, and the League of Women Voters coming together to talk about voter participation and voter empowerment is critical. Our democracy is really at stake, and we need all hands on deck to save it.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Chance, and then we'll let you, Rosemary, since you are the official host of the evening, I'll bring the closing remarks.
Okay.
This is not an unnatural occurrence. The mayor talked about it, and the mayor used an important term of coalition building. The civil rights movement is not an insular movement. It's not a movement that's contained merely to Black and colored communities. It's a movement that is a cooperative, coalition-based initiative across the generations. And we call it the struggle for civil rights for a reason, because it is a continual tug of war of interest. One winning at some point and the other winning at another, but ultimately it balancing out in favor of democracy. What we have before us is the opportunity to define the decades and the generations to come, to define the metes and bounds of our democracy. And either we'll be remembered as a generation that continued the fight for equal rights and equal justice, or we'll be swept away with the tide and another generation will take up that initiative. I'm confident that we, both young and seasoned, both Black and white, men and women, can get together and be creative about how to conquer these problems which continually evolve. And we can introduce age-old principles, but with new applications to evolve like we need to, and to make sure that we put a period on the prejudice that comes with the progress that we've seen in recent years. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. First of all, thank our incredible panelists. Edna, we are very grateful to you for speaking from the road and joining us. Mayor Johnson, it is wonderful to hear your history. I think that the idea of maybe having a leadership meeting with people would be very important. So I'm going to talk to Nina about getting together with Chadrick, and obviously I can maybe twist Ms. James' arm again, because I think you're absolutely right. We don't want to be working in silos. We absolutely need to be working together to make a difference. And I was so taken when I heard Mayor Johnson talk about what it was like when he was young, and it was a natural occurrence for young people to go and vote. How do we get that? After Columbine and after the shootings in schools, young people go and sign up and vote, and then we lose that momentum. How do we get that together? I agree, having the pastors of all denominations working together is incredibly important as well. So to all of you who have joined us, thank you very much. If you are new and have not heard of the League of Women Voters before, please go to our website. We are always pleased to have new members and younger members, just like we've said before. We tend to be an old group. We are a homogenous group, but we need to have more younger people join us and to keep the flag flying high for a long time to come. I want to tell you that next month, our next meeting will be on the 24th of March, and we're going to tackle the issue of healthcare. Healthcare in Georgia, there is a lot to be done, and there is a lot that we should be incredibly ashamed of. And I was struck, I think about 2 weeks ago, that Adam von Brimmer had a very good op-ed piece in the Savannah Morning News about the whole issue of Medicaid expansion. It can make such a difference to so many lives. So we hope you'll join us for that. We have speakers from the Commonwealth Fund, from the Georgia Budget and Policy Foundation, and from Georgians for a Healthy Future. So again, thank you on behalf of Nina for joining us, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters, we are thrilled to have this relationship with all of you. And good night.